Hello everyone, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Here for another Q&A. The question is, how do you store your ferments? Well, you know what? That's going to be a matter of choice. And to me, it also is going to depend on what it is. I mean, obviously my vinegars and my wines, I jar or bottle them up nice and tight, airtight. That's really important. If you don't want your wine to turn to vinegar, it needs to be airtight. If you don't want your vinegar to turn to nasty water, it needs to be airtight. And those get stored in my pantry. Now, when it comes to other types of ferments like the natural sodas, which is basically just almost like wine, but only fermented for a few days. It doesn't taste like wine. It's the same basic principle. I keep those in the fridge because I want to partly because I want to drink them chilled. Eggs, I typically keep my fermented eggs in the fridge. I do love fermenting hard-boiled eggs. When I got that time of year, which we're getting into that time of year where we're getting a lot of eggs coming in. And I love them. I love them better than regular hard-boiled eggs. They're not like pickled eggs. They're not sour. They're just better. They're just better than plain hard-boiled eggs, especially if you're adding spices and stuff to the water when you're fermenting it. But the eggs, especially, I typically will keep stored in the fridge. The kimchis, no matter what kind of kimchi it is. It's not always necessary, especially with your fruits, vegetables, and whatnot, to keep them in the fridge. But you're going to want to keep them in the coolest area you can. And here's why I don't like keeping a lot of that stuff out. The eggs in particular, I just feel better. Once I've let them ferment for 3 to 5 days and they're where I want them, I like to keep them in the fridge. I feel better about that. But with the kimchi and all that, it's more about, I don't want that stuff bubbling over in my pantry and then making a mess, because I've had it happen. And like with, I think I said this maybe last week, when I'm making extracts using my homemade vinegar, but maybe the vinegar or my homemade wine, and maybe those are still just a little bit fizzy when I go to use them. And then they'll still kind of bubble out from under the jar lid and just make a sticky mess all over in there. And I hate that. This is why I prefer to keep my ferments in the fridge, because they're less likely to boil. They're less likely to bubble over. The colder you can keep them, the less chance there is of that happening. But it's not necessary to keep them cold for them to stay preserved, because the fermenting process is what actually preserves them in the first place. So, and then the other thing too is by chilling your ferments, if you've got it right where you want it, you like just how it is, chilling it's going to prevent it. Like I say, it's a sauerkraut or a kimchi and you've got the flavor right where you want it. Keeping it cold is going to keep it from getting more sour or something like that. It's still going to keep fermenting, but it slows the process way, way down. So yeah, that's how I store my various ferments depending on what they are. Then somebody else asked what the best cut was for making jerky. Well, when it comes to jerky is a hard and chewy anyway. So it doesn't, in my personal opinion, it doesn't matter a whole lot. I just use whatever's there, whatever's available, whatever I have a lot of. The more tender it is, the easier it will be to eat even when it's dried, but it's still going to be hard and chewy. So I like to use roasts, because I can just get a whole roast and then just cut it up thin and into however many pieces I want or whatever size I want. But making jerky is not the same thing as just dehydrating meat where you want it light and crisp. So I cover this a lot because I feel like that's one of these things I need to get out there as much as possible. If you're not wanting a hard, chewy, jerky type meat, but you're wanting to dehydrate your chicken, your turkey, your beef, your elk, whatever, and you want it to be light and crisp, where it's something you can throw into casseroles, into soups, and it's not going to stay chewy no matter how long you cook it, then it's as simple as this. It turns out more like freeze-dried meats without having to have the cost of a freeze dryer. You just take that meat, like I'll cook up a turkey, cook up a chicken, cook up a roast or corned beef. You cook it up, then, you know, you eat on it that night. Then you can take whatever you're not going to use right away for making maybe another meal, like whole cannon or whatever, and then freeze it. And then once you've done that, let it freeze entirely, leave it in there for a few days at least. But make sure you've cut it up first. Make sure you cut it up into the sizes you want it first, or broken it up into the sizes you want it. Then get it out of the freezer. You only have to let it thaw just enough where you can spread it on your trays, and then you dehydrate it. That process of cooking and then freezing makes all the difference in the world of going from being a really chewy meat and being a light, crisp meat. And then the same applies, you know, if you have meats that you've pressure canned, you don't even have to do the freezing process because the pressure canning does the same thing. You just take you have a jar of pressure canned beef, pressure canned fish, pressure canned chicken or turkey, whatever it is. Just take that out, dump out your excess liquid, use it in a broth or something, and then spread that meat out on your dehydrating racks, and it will turn out the same way as if you had cooked and frozen it, because it's already been cooked, and then the process, right, while it's pressure canning, and then the pressure canning just really breaks that meat down the same way a freezer does, the freezing it. But again, it has to be, with the freezing thing, it has to be cooked first. You can't take raw meat out of the freezer and then cut it up and dehydrate it and expect it to turn out light and crisp. It still has to be cooked, frozen, then dehydrated. Even if it was previously frozen, you have to thaw it, cook it, freeze it again, and then dehydrate it. So, yeah. Okay, so, but as far as the cut of meat, it doesn't really matter, in my personal opinion. Now, some people may have their own opinions on that, but I've just used whatever. So I vacuum seal once all my stuff is fully dried and then fully cooled to room temperature. I vacuum seal into jars. And in this case, I prefer to use a brake bleeder pump and my food saver tops. Okay, I'm going to read, this wasn't a question, but it cracked me up because I didn't see it during the live, but it was something Tyler said. And he's always a goofball. Somebody had asked what grains I thought were lowest in carbs. Now, I'm not sure about that, but some of you who were there might have saw that. Tyler's answer was gunpowder is measured in grains, and it would be low in carbs. What a smarty pants. I just thought it was so hilarious. I wanted to go ahead and read it in case people missed it. That was pretty darn funny. So I like having Tyler in here when he can make it because, you know, he's just so hilarious. Yep, that would definitely be low in carbs. Might have a little bit of an explosive action, but it would be low in carbs. All right, then I had somebody else come in and saw this old video I did on soaking grains and why I did it. Now, I got to touch on this one because I don't soak my grains and dry them anymore. It's just a couple of extra steps that for us, I found absolutely pointless. I did it for a while. So what I would do is I'd take the whole grains. I'm talking mostly like my wheat grains I would use for making bread. I would soak them for about 24 hours in a jar with a splash of vinegar in there, homemade, of course. And then the next day I would take those, strain them out, spread them out either on a stoneware cookie sheet that I dry on my wood stove or dry in my electric dehydrators, depending on the time of the year. Then I would take those grains and I would grind them up for flour. Now, then you can also go the extra step, the added step of sprouting your grains and then drying them and then grinding them up for flour. Now, I absolutely believe that for a lot of people, that has been a really good answer for those, maybe it's those people that have issues with gluten, but it's other things than that too. But people who just have a hard time with grains find that either simply soaking the grains first and then using those to make your breads. Obviously, you can't grind them while they're wet. They're going to grind better once they're dried. Or then going the extra mile and then sprouting them, drying them, and then making the bread. They find that they have no problems with grains. They just, no issues. Well, we don't have problems with grains anyway. So it's just, I tried it for a while. I did it for, I think, about a year, maybe 2 years. I was doing that. And then I realized, you know what? I've not noticed any difference between doing that and just using good organic grains and grinding them up and using them fresh. I personally noticed no difference. So that's why I don't do it anymore, because with my time being as precious as it is, I just don't see the need to add the extra step. But if you're one who has sensitivities to grains, consider giving it a try. It might be helpful, because I've had a lot of people tell me that's just been the trick for them. Since you dry them after soaking, how long can you keep them before milling? You know, Tammy, that's a good question. I'm really not sure. I would assume they would keep just as long as any other grain. I think in this, I would just usually grind them up right away and use them. But I would assume that if you vacuum sealed them into jars, or if you're doing a ton of them, you know, sealed up really well into Mylar in a bucket, they'd probably keep just as long. But I wouldn't do that. I would just maybe keep them in a jar and just do enough, like I did before, just do what I needed to at a time. So obviously you have to be a day or two ahead on it if you're doing it that way, you know, always being ahead. So like if you're making bread all the time, you might need to be soaking a jar of grains every day, and every day have those grains, another jar that, you know, while you're soaking one, you've got another jar that's drying for the day, and then you have more that are ready to use immediately. So, okay, let's move on. And I got a couple more. And this is one I get a lot. So much so that I try to remember to say this whenever I'm talking about using my homemade wine to make extracts and other things. I get a lot of people say, well, can I use store-bought? Yes, you can use store-bought. Sometimes I just say my homemade wine, part of it just rolls off my tongue because you know, it's just what I do. But the thing that, and I also throw that out there too, is so people know you can make your own wine. It's really easy and it's better for you. It's healthier than what you're going to buy in the store. So that's the other thing that people need to know is if you may, you know, all you need is a few things like a glass jug or a carboy, an airlock. Well, even a balloon will work. I still recommend investing in a couple of airlocks because they're cheap. So it's not really even that much of an investment. You know, $3 a piece if you're buying them individually, or maybe $6 for a set of 3 of them. And then maybe some kind of long tube. You can actually, in fact, I finally just bought myself one of these. I'm going to try it. I hope it works better. You just need some kind of long tube for siphoning it out when you go to rack it so you can get as few sediments in there once it's done. But it's super simple, and you know what's in there. So your store-bought wines are going to have a lot of additives in them. So they add clarifiers. That's how they always get such crystal clear wines, because they use clarifiers. I never use clarifiers. I never have. In fact, it wasn't until in the past few years I learned, oh, that's how they get it so clear. They use clarifiers, because I've had some wine and mead turn out super clear by repeated racking, but it doesn't always turn out that way. A lot of times it will still stay cloudy and it's no big deal. But what happens with clarifiers is that it binds all the stuff in the wine and helps it to settle to the bottom, and that way you can end up with it crystal clear. And I stopped worrying about it, and I've still never used clarifiers, but there are natural ones that can be used. Like I've heard of people using bentonite clay, because that apparently binds all that stuff that's floating around there that gives it the cloudy look. But it's all good stuff that's in there. It's not going to hurt you. So I just, as long as it tastes good or it's strong enough for me to use for my extracts, that's all that matters. All right, let me get to, I have one more question, and it's not really a question. So it was one of the things I put in the title because, well, the other day I saw this going around on, in the local Facebook group where, oh, I heard there's this horrible storm coming on Monday and blah, blah, blah. And people were starting to kind of freaking out. And, I'm not seeing anything in my phone app in the weather thing. Well, then on Sunday, it showed, this big, scary, scary thing about this windstorm that was coming. And, and it even it says severity, and then, it could say not severe or whatever. And it says severe, and then danger of, let's see, what did it say? Danger of loss of life and property damage. And I'm like, okay, so they're scaring the pants off of people over some windstorm that's really common, especially this time of year. And then you go on to read it, and it's talking about, what to expect, trees getting blown down and power outages. Yeah, like happens all the time. And then you scroll down a little bit farther, because I did take a screenshot of this and circled a couple of things, circled the one in red where it was talking about severe and how scary, scary, scary. And at the bottom, I circled the part where it said what to do. And I'm just like, this has got to be the dumbest thing. So first they're going to scare the pants off of everyone. Then they're going to turn around and tell them to just, make sure you're prepared according to the description being trees getting blown over, blown down and power outages. And I'm sitting there thinking how stupid that is, because especially where we live, and I know I've said this before, there's a lot of people around here that, despite the fact we get a plethora of power outages all through the year, especially through the winter, it's dumb to me that people around here aren't prepared for power outages. But I mean, mainly that's what they're telling you to be prepared for, are the power outages. And well, obviously just, watching out for, don't be out in the weather. If you got to drive into Port Angeles or something, there might be some downed trees or some whatever, obviously. But again, these are things that happen all the time around here. It just made me roll my eyes. How stupid it was. And I'm like, so all they're doing is they're telling people to do what they should always be doing. When you live in an area like this that has frequent power outages, you should always be doing that stuff. You should always be prepared. You should always have some kind of backup light source and cook source. I mean, even if you can't afford to buy a generator or have solar power, especially solar power, because that's a pretty big expense, at least a camp stove or a barbecue so you have something to cook on and have some food on hand, because you may not be able to make it to the store. It's not hard. It doesn't have to be scary, scary. The windstorm did hit, but it took about 4 or 5 hours for it to finally hit us. And it was no different than any other windstorm that we get throughout the winter. It's it's like that. What was it, a couple months ago where I didn't even know anything about it until people were emailing me. It's like, oh, I heard you have a bomb cyclone coming your way. And I'm like, what? A bomb? I never even heard of that. Never even heard of that. So I get to look and I'm like, ooh, okay, that sounds kind of terrifying. Never heard of one like that before. It was just another windstorm, like any other windstorm. Now, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't take the warnings and go, oh, okay, well, maybe I should double check and make sure that everything's battened down. We got things tied down. We don't have ladders leaning up against the house so that they can get blown down. Obviously, it's good to have warnings so you can go, oh, okay, well, maybe today wouldn't be a good day to drive to Port Angeles and then get stuck in traffic because there's a tree or two or three that have been blown down going around the lake and there's no way around it. So I reposted it on my Facebook page, and of course my Facebook profile, not my page, and just said, this is just silly. First scare the pants off of everyone and then turn around and give them the only solution is for them to do what they should have been doing all along anyway, with all the massive power outages we have, all the windstorms we have. Hello? And guess what? Our power never went out after all. So all this fear mongering, and we should just go, okay, well, that's good to know that's coming. Let me check to see if I've got any holes in my preparedness. But not to live in fear. I mean, that's part of the reason why we do what we do, is so we don't have to live in fear of everything, especially when they're screaming at us about bomb cyclones and killer winds. I mean, it was to the point that Patrick, every time I needed to go outside, he's like, watch out for them killer winds. We were joking around about that. And, so I went out to shut the chickens up, and the chickens are still running around. It's evening. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to try to hurt them up. I'm just going to go back inside, wait another 10 minutes, and they should all be in there so I can shut them in. So, I'm joking around about, okay, my chickens just put my life at risk twice because I had to go out in the scary, scary wind. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm being really, really sarcastic. But that's the thing that I think probably irritates me more than anything, is seeing people from any side. It doesn't matter if they're preparedness-minded people or non-preparedness-minded people. Somebody's always wanting to scare the pants off you about something, and then never have any real solutions other than what's just basic common sense in the first place. It's like, just practice common sense. You won't have to worry about it. I mean, most things. Obviously, there's certain natural disasters and whatnot that we can never, ever fully be prepared for, large life events. But you still want to do the best you can. And speaking of that, this reminded me of something else that was just said today on the video that published on my main channel today, where somebody was talking about, and I've seen people say this a lot, that, well, sadly, you just can't trust organic. And I get that. I totally understand. I'm not saying anything against the person that said that. But what bothers me about this is that, does that mean that we stop trying? Just so it's the same idea. Do we stop trying to do the best we can to get our hands on as organic and non-GMO food as possible? Be it stuff that we're purchasing from places like Azure Standard, that I trust more than any other company when it comes to food, or the stuff that we grow ourselves. But even the stuff we grow ourselves, we cannot fully control what's falling from the sky. So does that mean we stop trying and then just go to the store and start buying a bunch of processed junk that's all, loaded with chemicals and garbage? No, of course we don't do that. Same thing goes with being prepared for storms and for hard life situations. There will be things you will never be fully prepared for, no matter how much of an expert you think you are. You will never fully be prepared for certain life events. But does that mean you stop trying and stop doing the best you can? Obviously not. Obviously not. Because even if it helps at least a little bit, it's still a little bit. It's still something. And in most cases, it will help you weather the basic storms of life. So anyway, I hope you all had a great day and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for dropping in. Thank you just for being there, and all your comments and all your interaction and helping each other out. And take care, and God bless.